All right, my IBMOR brothers, since I'm doing this series anyway, I have a article I just ran across. I don't know if somebody sent it to me or I was researching it. I think somebody sent it to me. Either Adrian or Julius actually sent it to me. But this is from Psychology Today. Feminizing Boys as we masculinize girls. Should we try to make our sons like what our daughters used to be? One of the things I remember from my graduate school experience was learning about Occam's razor. Basically, what I recall is that it meant that when competing theories arise, it is best to use the one that makes the fewest assumptions. In essence, the simplest one. If ever there were a place where there are all kinds of competing theories and explanations today, it's the study of gender. And while academics, and I have my credentials here with a PhD in psychology and more than 25 years of research and college teaching, will constantly speak in careful terms, and hem and haw, at least in public, I suspect, that like me, in the privacy of their own homes, or definitely in the privacy of their own minds, things are much simpler. Even if they don't use Occam's razor in their public pronouncement, it's there. Life is too complicated for it not to be. My title is my attempt to apply Occam's razor to the trends I see all over the academic world and in the media. We are feminizing boys as we masculinize girls. I've been obsessed by gender issues for more than 40 years, monomaniacal about it in the way my younger brother put it a couple of decades ago. But these days, the whole country seems to have joined me in my obsession. And in so much of what I read, there is a major issue. Masculinity is a problem. So we have to re-educate our boys, and I use the term re-educate quite purposely because it does have negative connotations. For example, it has been used to describe what took place during the Cultural Revolution in China. Whether the title of a piece is The Stigma of Masculinity, Can Men Stay Manly Without Feeling Ashamed? Or How to Raise a Feminist Son, a Redefining Masculinity. The message is the same. There is something inherently wrong with boys, or at least in the way they have been raised in the past, and many still are, and we have to do something about it. What are masculine and feminine anyhow? In spite of a difficulty with a gender binary that so many people have these days, I strongly believe that there will still be general agreement on terms for each category. One frequently used measure of masculinity and femininity is androgyny, which would be a relatively high score on both sides. Is the BIM Sex Role Inventory, or BSRI, developed by Sandra Bim more than 40 years ago. BIM, 1974. Here are just a few items from that 60-item self-administered instrument, where individuals put a number from 1, never, almost never true of me, to 7, always or almost always true of me. Among the characteristics associated with masculinity are still self-reliant, defends own beliefs, aggressive, acts as a leader. Among characteristics on the feminine side are these: yielding, helpful, sensitive to the needs of others, and gentle. Another self-scoring test measuring masculinity and femininity, though referred to as instrumentality and expressivity, is the Personal Attributes Questionnaire, or PAQ, developed by Janet T. Spence, Robert Helmreich, Joyce Stapp in 1975. Notice all these women. Among the masculine characteristics on the 24-item scale are independent and self-confident and competitive. Among the feminine characteristics are emotional, very aware of feelings of others, helpful to others. There is no question that today's parents are being urged to encourage their sons to be sensitive to the needs of others, emotional and helpful, and not be aggressive. At the same time, they are encouraging their daughters to defend their beliefs, take leadership roles, and be self-reliant and competitive. The problem for boys and men whose masculinity is being subject to attack is that many studies have shown that both men and women who scored higher on the masculinity than the femininity scale were more likely to have higher self-esteem, which often correlates with success. The original thinking by Bim and others was that the most highly successful people would be androgynous, defined as scoring above the median on both masculinity and femininity. So it was surprising to many that this was often not the case, but rather that scoring higher on masculinity frequently the best predictor of success. I'm not saying that extremes of masculinity, which could include violence, are acceptable, but given the association of masculine traits with self-esteem and success, something which our society has now at least tacitly recognized for our daughters, and given the many ways in which boys and young men are lagging behind girls and young women in their education, as well as many other ways, it seems unwise to feminize our sons while we encourage independence, self-confidence, and competitiveness in our daughters. Finally, if evolutionary psychology means anything at all, and there is much evidence that it does, will our independent, strong, confident daughters ultimately want men who don't share these traits? We shall see. Sweden is experimenting with trying to make its preschools as gender neutral as possible, but this necessarily means a reversal of the usual sex roles. The headline of a front page story in the New York Times several days ago read, "Sweden's preschools, boys learn to dance and girls learn to yell. Is this a wave of the future? If so, decades of research suggests that it is a very uncertain one." I would agree. And that is from Psychology Today. I can't read the doctor's name. You'll have to read it for yourself. But what did I tell you? What did I tell you? There's two things that I've been telling you for about the past year. One, they are trying to do what? Feminize boys. And, they're admitting it now. But like I said, this started back in 1975 under Title IX. This started back in 1975 with this gender roles, where they started studying gender roles and how to basically masculinize girls by what? Making them more competitive. That's why they wanted women's sports. They didn't want women's sports to just allow girls to have fun, because most girls weren't really interested in sports. What they wanted to do is engender masculine traits in women. Because in 1912, and as part of my work, I'm actually going to pull those sections from the boy problem. In 1912, what they found out is that boys weren't interested in school, especially the Prussian school system, which is our standard public school system, because there were too many women floating into the teachers' ranks, because females were cheaper. Women were cheaper to hire as teachers. So you had like 90% of the teachers were actually women. And they found out it was feminizing the boys, and the boys were getting disinterested, and they were ultimately dropping out of school. So to, number one, not feminize the boys, two, keep the boys interested and keep them in school, they implemented stuff like what? Like more math, more science, more concrete subjects. And secondly, what they found out is that implemented what we call recess, which is out there on the school grounds, and noontime, lunchtime physical education. And then your afternoon breaks, you get more recess, because boys need to run around and go outside and move around, right? And they found out that appeals to little boys' masculine nature. And they found out that boys naturally form hunting parties. So to keep down or tamp down the aggression, or have an avenue for the aggression to flow out of, they started forming what? Teams, sports teams. Your sports teams actually evolved, like football, basketball, and that kind of stuff, to actually give boys something to do, for them to actually exercise that aggressive nature in a proper way. What they found out is they learned teamwork, they learned togetherness, they learned obeying the rules, and they found out that athletics was an avenue to actually engender those traits that make people successful. So in 1972, they basically wanted to, you can tell the reason they wanted girls to play sports because they wanted the same kind of competitive nature that you get from sports that boys naturally have to be developed in women. And as you have moved up the ranks, because they wanted what they called equity, they want basically boys and girls to be interchangeable parts. That's how come a lot of little boys are taking home economics, learning how to change diapers, learning how to cook, learning how to clean, learn how to take care of a house, so they can be a supportive role. But and the second thing that this article said, the exact same thing I said. If you tamp down your boys and feminize your boys to make them more supportive, and you make the girls more aggressive, what they call competitive, what they really mean is more aggressive, more assertive, more independent thinkers, and less feeling. Will those women want those kind of boys, or will those kind of men when they grow up? The more supportive men, the less aggressive men, the less assertive men. And the answer has been no. Not only is it in the literature, but I have talked to lots of people that are married with those kind of men, and they grow up loveless and they don't respect those men. And the men are not comfortable in the roles that they're in the supportive role. They're not comfortable. So even though a group of boys are actually trained for it, because the schools have actually geared them that way, they have them basically, if you look at the cartoons and all the movies, a lot of your strong women have supportive men, where the women make the decisions and the men follow. And also those women and those supportive men are in a relationship. In other words, those are the woman's love interest. And it used to be, when I was coming up, the strong, silent type, the assertive man, the decisive man was the one that got the girls. But now it's the assertive girl, the decisive girl that gets the supportive boy. So they've been slowly brainwashing our children to go against their biological nature. That's why he slipped in the little thing about evolutionary psychology, because that's biology. And the second thing, there's another thing he put in there about, since they've started to tamp down the boys and actually gear the schools toward making assertive girls and decisive girls and decision-making girls, they found that boys and young men are lagging behind girls and young women in education, because the education is not tailored for them like it used to be. It used to be tailored for the little boys to actually keep them in school. So for the last 50 years, the educational system has been slanted toward girls, and it's noticeable. Now it's been slanted so far toward girls. Now the little girls are coming out of school and they don't have little boys that they can look up to, or they can feel that they can marry or be with that happily, because they don't have any respect for them. These are white people. These are not black folks. This is a white author. They really weren't trying to make an egalitarian, equal playing field. They were trying to do what? Put girls in leadership. Just what you look what you see who's running for president. How many men are actually running for the 2020 presidency versus how many women? Women are coming out the woodwork to run for president. You see more female judges, more female congressmen, more female senators. And this is coming into the white sector. This is not blacks, because black women have always dominated for the most part, dominated the political sector. Sometimes not at the top, the very tippy top, but down in the lower ranks, you always had a lot of black women dominating the political sector. So, but now they're crashing into the male sector. So this man is actually admitting, because he's been doing this for 25 years, he's admitting that this is what has been going on. And I suspect he has a son, and now it's starting to bother him. Probably has a son and a grandson. But it's starting to bother him because his kids have to go through this. And he's noticed that it has feminized his sons. And like he said, this is stuff that they say quietly to themselves and they can't say it out loud. I told you about that Gillette commercial about toxic masculinity. And he's saying the same thing that I read back in 2012, which is the richer sex. Well, Liz Mundy asked, can a man still be masculine and hold these supportive ideas would be, which is caring and feeling, which men are not wired for. They're just not wired for that. And forcing them to be caring and feeling and socialize them to be caring and feeling when they're not wired for it does cause a disconnect, which has resulted in the red pill, which has resulted in MGTOW, which has resulted in IBMOR, SYSBM, pickup artists, PUAs. This is the masculine nature of boys and men trying to surface against their socialization, against their nurture by their parents, by the school system, and by the society. But anyway, since I'm on this course, I decided to drop this one and read this one into the record. It should be ongoing, but this is BGS out, and I will see you guys on the next one. Peace.